Welcome to the virtual community open house for the City of Shelton's Police Chief Candidate Finalists. I'm Michelle Sutherland, the Administrative Services Director.
And I'm Mary Ricker, the city's Communications and Government Relations Specialist.
I'd like to thank you for registering for this afternoon open house. We feel community involvement is really critical to the success of the city. So I just have a few important rules to go over and keep in mind to help the open house run as smoothly as possible. So all participants' microphones will be muted, except when they're asking a question to one of the candidates. Please use the raise hand feature on Zoom to signal you would like to ask a question. Mary or I will call on a participant and their microphone will be unmuted. And questions and comments must stay with the proper purpose of a public forum, which means they must generally concern public safety and policing. So we'll get started by introducing Ronald Schaub, currently a programs lieutenant
Volume came over
Pierce
that
County
earlier
Sheriff's Office.
today.
So did anyone have any questions for Ron this afternoon? Just looking for a raise hand button if anyone does have a question.
You might want to let Kathy know to mute her microphone.
Oh,
Okay,
perfect.
thank you, Kathy.
Well, if nobody has any questions right away, why don't we start? Ronald, if you want to maybe introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background about why you wanted to apply for the position.
Sure. This has really been a fun question to think about, because as in the Sheriff's Department, where I've been for 26 years, the programs lieutenant was a brand new position and it has 7 different programs. So I don't have any boring days, because the diversity of things that I have my hands in is always new every single day. Today, I was talking about drones. Yesterday, I was doing mental health co-responders. On a different day, I'm dealing with community outreach stuff through our community liaison deputies. I liken leadership to entrepreneurism. And the correlation is I had one of the friends of mine that I worked with in patrol for years, Jim Luffelholtz, asked me today, he goes, so Ron, what are you planning on doing? And I said, Jim, I'm looking at opportunities outside of the department. And Jim nods his head and goes, yeah, I've never had any desire to do that. And I think as you think of entrepreneurism, why do people go into business for themselves? It's not because they're bad employees. They like a degree of self-determination. They like the idea of building a company that represents their values and that allows them to use their gifting to its fullest potential. And I think as I looked at it is, for the first time in 20 years, we'll have a brand new sheriff in Pierce County. And that means there's going to be a tremendous amount of change. I know who I believe will probably prevail. And my best friend and mentor, Rob Masco, who's the former undersheriff of Pierce County, he's on that particular candidate's transition team. And he goes, hey, Ron, they look at you as a great supervisor, someone they don't need to worry about, but they're not looking at you for the command staff. And for me, I've done the chief's work twice, both for the town of Steilacoom and for Pierce Transit Police. I love that work. I love building teams. I love building a workplace that people love coming to work, where they work hard, they have fun, they provide great service to the public. And if I was content just grabbing a paycheck and doing a good job, if that is all I was motivated to do, I'd probably have the best lieutenant's job on the sheriff's department. But that's not how I'm wired. That's not what I'm looking for in the last 8 to 10 years of my career. And, as I've seen, having been a chief twice, it's a tremendous honor to be considered for these positions and to be the one that they ultimately select. That puts you in rare air. And it's an extreme honor to represent a community, to serve a department, and to be part of an executive team. So those things are what I'm looking for. It's why I went back to graduate school in my mid-40s as a brand new police chief with 3 young kids at home, balancing being a new chief, including the fire service, which I had no exposure to prior to taking that role, and working 3 off-duty jobs to help pay for graduate school. So I was busy for 2 years, but I did it because I wanted to be prepared for leadership opportunities. When I was done with graduate school, went off to the FBI Academy and spent 10 more weeks away from my wife and children, doing executive development back at Quantico, Virginia on the Marine Corps campus is where the FBI headquarters is at. And again, that was about professional development. It's why I subscribe to podcasts, leadership blogs, the Harvard Business Review, because leadership development and being the best version of myself, both individually and corporately as a leader, is what I'm passionate about. So that's one of the reasons why I looked, because my youngest stepdaughter is a sophomore here in Tacoma. I had to kind of say, I'm willing to drive about an hour away from Tacoma, because that's realistic, to look for other opportunities outside of the department, which further refines where you can go. If the world is your oyster, you can go to any state, and there are jobs nationally all the time. But we're still here in Pierce County, and that's part of just the spot that I'm in. And obviously, it was a great opportunity. I was impressed. Trying to run a process virtually is I'm sure an amazing challenge on the logistics side, but also trying to connect with people just on a human side over a video conferencing camera. That's not an easy task, and I think you guys really did an amazing job pulling this together.
Well, awesome. Thank
Sorry
you.
for the selfless plug.
Oh, no, it's all good. And thank you for the kind words. If anyone has any questions for Ronald, feel free to use the raise hand feature on Zoom, and we'll call on some people as we see them come up. So does anyone have any questions? Give people a second.
Yeah, well, I don't see any questions coming up right now. Why Shelton run?
Great question. Obviously, I go down there every year for emergency vehicle operation training at the academy, and we always come to Shelton. That's where everybody goes to eat lunch. I will tell you a couple things I did. I spoke with Mike Painter, who's the executive recruiter for WASPIC. And I said, okay, Mike, here's a couple opportunities I'm looking at. One of them that's really high up on my list is Shelton. Tell me a little bit more about it Mike is very well respected in those circles. So talk to me about the department from an outsider who has contact with agencies all over the state of Washington. He was very complimentary of the work that Chief Moody's done, both accreditation. I know you have the body cameras. He's done a lot of heavy lifting in terms of restructuring the department. It is smaller in the sense of what I'm responsible for now, because I have 7 programs and about 50 employees. When I was in transit, I had about 45 employees, both inside transit and outside of transit, not including 2 contracts with Federal Way Police Department and the Lakewood Police Department. So it's a little bit smaller than that. But the thing that I grew up in Eatonville. I'm a small town kid. Eatonville was a logging community. Eatonville used to be a lumber community. My grandfather, I'd grown up as a kid living with him in Ashford, which is even a smaller town of about 250. He felled timber for Champion. He felled timber for St. Regis. My uncle worked for Weyerhaeuser. So I come from a timber industry. That's the community I grew up in. When you look at a smaller department, it's bigger than the smallest department I've ran, but it's big enough that it has some complexity, that it has its own unique challenges, certainly with the economics that a lot of small communities are dealing with. Being a part of an executive team that can navigate those extreme challenges of how do we provide great service on a finite amount of resources. I will say that a thing that played into it as we're going through this process, because it's about fit, both your fit for who you're looking for to take over that department, but also fit as a candidate saying, okay, does this make sense? Seeing how well you navigated this virtual process gave me confidence in how the team of the city is managed. Meeting the city manager said, okay, is this somebody I could work with? Absolutely. So I'd say going through the process, I triaged a couple different opportunities. One that I thought was going to be high up. By the time I was done doing their process in the last couple of weeks, I said, no, not interested. And it may have been just how they handled the virtual piece, but how you do in little things are going to be indicative of how you do in larger things.
Well, it looks like we have our first question from Diedrich. So Diedrich, if you'd like to go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
We're good. We can hear you.
All right, Ron, just a quick question. You said the last 8 to 10 years of your career. Can you elaborate on that? Is that how long you expect to be in this position, if selected?
Well, the answer would be yes. I've already determined, this is something my wife and I have talked about. She's originally from Wyoming. That's probably, we now have a second home in Montana, which is probably our retirement destination. When you make the commitment to come to an organization, I think you also make the commitment is I'm going to be here for a while. I'm not looking at the next stop to be a stepping stone to something else. I want to be able to put roots down, establish myself, and provide great leadership for that team, probably for the balance of what I deem as my career. Now, when I say 8 to 10 years, that'll make me 62, 63. Does that mean I'm done in law enforcement? Maybe, maybe not. I haven't made that determination. My uncle was a teacher in the Eatonville School District for, at least 35 years, went to the private schools and taught another 10 years. So it's not an age thing, it's a passion thing. And when you reach that point that you're done and you know you're done, then it's time for the benefit of yourself and the team and the community to in this case, hang it up. It'll be a wonderful career. But as I'm looking at it, is I'm looking for a place I can put down roots and finish my career.
Thank you.
It looks like we have another question from Amanda. So Amanda, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm a resident of Shelton. I own a house here, and recently I have been following local events. We're a pretty purple city, surprisingly, here in Shelton, and that's led to some tension in our downtown. So my question is that while most everyone in our community does recognize open carry laws, we've seen some behavior that really pushes the boundaries of that. So how would you address the issue of civilians brandishing firearms and assault weapons in public settings in an intimidating fashion?
Boy, that's a great question. That's a tough one. I mean, I realize the open carry laws allow people to do certain things that, you're talking about the perception issue. I grew up, obviously, hunting. I grew up with a BB gun when I was 6 or 8 years old, and then it was my grandfather's 22. I grew up around guns. Guns don't scare me. I have family members and friends that have never been around firearms, and the mere presence of firearms causes them a great deal of concern. And it's not because anybody is being unsafe. I've had this discussion with my daughter and her husband. They're out in Georgia. And one of the things I tell them is I personally don't necessarily understand why someone wants to open carry. There are a lot of things that you can do that are legal, but I'll be honest, when you bring a gun to a confrontation, even if it's just an argument, the possibility of something bad happening, of somebody in a fit or a moment of weakness doing something that they can't undo, is extremely high. From the law enforcement perspective, more officers are killed with their own guns than with other people's weapons. Why? Because every confrontation or contact between an officer and a citizen is always an armed confrontation. And when you bring that thing, it heightens the level of anxiety. I like the idea of being able to talk through most things if we can have a rational conversation. And again, I realize it's people's constitutional right. But again, I think it creates a really weird dynamic of the potential, the escalated potential for violence to break out, where normal people without those guns wouldn't have the ability to go too far. And having served in the military, my family served in the military, a lot of the guys that have worked for me have served in the military. And it's easy to say, I am willing to take a human life until you take a human life. And you can't undo that. You can't undo the consequences that you're going to deal with emotionally and psychologically. And in a fraction of a millisecond, you can make a decision that you may be wound up and bound up in litigation for a decade. And I think there's room to have a dialogue. It's one thing to say I'm protecting my property, although in this state that could be problematic. We don't view protecting property the same as protecting human life or the life of another. So that's kind of how I look at it, is I'm willing to engage in those conversations. But if your behavior rises to the level that it causes fear and concern in other people, you're getting too close to that line. And that's part of where open carry will break down. So that's kind of how I view the open carry.
Thank you, Ron. It looks like Heidi has the next question. So whenever you're ready, Heidi.
Thank you. Hi, Ronald. Heidi McCutche, Mason County Chamber of Commerce. I'm interested in if you've spoken to any community members or business owners, and if so, what their perception of crime is in Shelton and what they think the biggest issue might be.
No, unfortunately, the week before the interview panels began, I was in Montana for a week when I was notified that I was going to get a chance to actually come out and participate. So I did not have a chance to connect with anybody, in the community. Just looking at the stuff that I've seen online, obviously property crimes, whether it's burglaries, vehicle thefts, shoplifts were a higher number. There was a handful of aggravated assaults, a lot of simple assaults, a decent amount of domestic violence stuff, and a moderate amount of narcotics related crimes. That's the part of community policing that sometimes I think gets lost is, there are obviously big things that are going to happen that we as law enforcement professionals and as the agency that is going to serve the community that, we're going to prioritize. But in those times where you're not responding to calls, that's where you have that discretionary time where you begin to look at what are those community issues, the things that are the hot button. When I was in Steilacoom, people speeding through town, because Steilacoom is kind of in between Joint Base Lewis McChord, Lakewood, and the city of University Place, people pass through. And the citizens were very concerned about traffic accidents, speeding through their neighborhoods, kids. And so they wanted traffic enforcement. That was one of their things that was super important to the mayor and the town administrator because it was conveyed from the citizenry. When you have that discretionary time where you're not responding to calls for service, that's where community policing comes in, where you can meet the business owners, visit the schools, connect with people out on the cul-de-sac playing basketball, but also the opportunity to say, what are those quality of life issues that the community members want to see us address? So that's kind of how I view that piece.
Thank you, Ron.
If anyone has any questions for Ron, just a reminder to hit the raise hand feature on Zoom so that way we can see it and we can call on you. But since I don't see any currently, how about, since you've heard a lot, actually, just kidding. We'll hold that. It looks like Amanda has another question. So Amanda, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, I have 3 to 5 questions pre-written that I'm hoping to ask each of the candidates. So I'm trying not to take up too much space.
No, you're good. It looks like we have about 10 minutes. So if you want to ask, we'll see how many you have time for. So
sure. And just so everybody knows why I keep raising my hand.
No, it's all
in any
good.
case, so my second question is, how would you support de-escalation and mental health first aid training for officers in Shelton?
Well, one of the programs that I took over that was about 6 months old when I got there 2 years ago was we have a team of 6 mental health co-responders. So they are master level clinicians that are also designated crisis responders. So they have the power of commitment, just like law enforcement officers do. And that particular program is addressing a huge need in Pierce County. It covers the entirety of the county, except the city of Lakewood, because they have their own program, and the city of Tacoma, because they also have their own program. They do not ride with officers. They respond to scenes where the officers are. That is a program that I know the Healthcare Authority, DSHS is looking at. We have a huge gap in the mental health system in this state. And given that we're one of the strongest economies in the nation, and the fact that our mental health system is so far down towards the bottom, there's a huge gap there. Now, part of how we funded what we did was through what we call True Blood grant money. The True Blood was a class action federal lawsuit done by, Disability Rights of Washington was, I believe, the plaintiff, but it was dealing with these folks that have, significant mental health issues. Fortunately, this program is not only addressing class members that are in our community, but it is also dealing with people in crisis. That could be from co-occurring like substance abuse / mental health because they're co-occurring. It can be people that are in substance abuse. There are times that we deal with the homeless population to see if we can connect them to resources. It also deals with people that are just going through crisis, whether it's someone through PTSD, a domestic violence situation. We've used them, called out to times where they were going out to help assist SWAT with a barricaded suspect, people that are threatening to commit suicide. Now, is that program going to necessarily help, the city of Shelton and Mason County? No, but is there a way to begin to look down that pathway that if the state provides a funding mechanism, is there a way to partner potentially with the county to provide some sort of, mental health co-responder program or designated or an MHP that can be there, whether it's dealing with fire personnel, but frontline first responders, certainly. Because if we find someone who's in crisis, regardless of what that crisis is there a way to change their particular situation and connect them with the right resource, whether it's short-term or long-term? But dealing with mental health issues, something that it is not going away. If anything, it's escalating. So we found that program has, we were just talking about sustainability funding yesterday on a Microsoft team meeting, because everybody that is a participant in the county realizes that this is an invaluable resource that improves the quality of life of the citizens, and it fills this huge need that is present in the community. So I think I would look to try to find ways, is there something that we can do? And number one, you have to figure out is, what's the scope of the local problem? Does it justify spending local resources to address the problem? Because sometimes the problem's there, but it doesn't justify like a full-time position. So is there a way to partner? How might we do this? So I think that's where I would start, is using my experience of working with that program for almost 2 years.
All right, thank you, Ron. Amanda, we had another question that popped up, so we're going to come back to you after this next question. Heidi, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Community-based policing is something that we often hear about, but I'm interested if you can talk a little bit about some of the relationships you've built out in your current community, and if there are certain leaders or community members that you've developed a relationship with that you lean on for public perception or kind of wayfinding.
Yeah, great question. What one of our programs that we put together as a department, is obviously is a large department. We serve about a 500,000 people. We crafted this program we call the Community Liaison Deputy Program. So it's got 5 dedicated deputies, a sergeant, and an outreach coordinator who is a direct appointment of, at that time was Sheriff Pastor. And so they looked at, how do we connect not only with the elected officials, because a lot of people will contact their county council member and say, hey, we're having a problem at this business, and they'll go to the county council sometimes before they'll come to the department. And this was a team that their whole point was about creating, community engagement, community involvement, addressing things that patrol weren't going to necessarily have time to address. Some of that could be SEPTED, dealing with environmental design to minimize opportunity for crime to happen. It was working with business owners up and down Pacific Avenue that were addressing chronic homelessness, not the homeless folks themselves, but when these people are setting up their camps right in the doorways of the business, how do we address that? When they create camps that are on public property, and that's not what we want to go do, how do we address that? So one of the things that I did when I got there is I wanted to make sure, because one of the biggest community outreach things that we had as an organization was our school resource officers. Puyallup District, Bethel District, Franklin Pierce, Peninsula, University Place was under University Place's police department, but that has since changed. If you looked at the number of students that we had in terms of direct connection with those families, you're talking at least 50,000 students and all of the corresponding families. So I went to each school. I met, whether it was superintendents, directors of security, principals of all the high schools and middle schools. But the point is I wanted to create a connection so that if they weren't getting the service they expected from either the deputies assigned to their school and the sergeant who was in charge of them was actually running 2 programs. So he had 15, I think it was either 13 or 15 school resource officers, but they also was running the crime suppression team, which is now attached to the Marshals Violent Offender Task Force. So that one sergeant was being spread very thin across 2 distinctly different programs with different stakeholders and different needs. So I wanted to make sure that I was creating a direct connection back to those schools. Another thing that we did is we connected with Rotary clubs, chambers of commerce, because we have a lot of communities that are in the central part of our patrol district: Parkland, Spanaway, Frederickson, Graham, South Hill, and the Mid-County. These are areas that with the Growth Management Act and the county's growth plan are going to be cities eventually. So we wanted to connect with the civic organizations, the community leaders in those. COVID kind of derailed that because a lot of our meetings, one of the biggest ones that we did was our mid-county leadership meeting that was done quarterly at Pacific Lutheran University. We'd have all the school districts there, business leaders there, elected officials, both state and local would show up, besides just people from the community that were interested. That kind of derailed that. Another group that I started to get into, but I was only able to attend one meeting before COVID shut everything down. There's a homeless coalition group that was meeting at the Salvation Army headquarters, which was actually in the city of Tacoma, because I wanted to have a presence there with our outreach coordinator so that if they had law enforcement specific questions, that there would be somebody there that they would be able to develop a relationship with. Unfortunately, COVID just derailed most of those things. So, those are the big ones. Certainly relationships with the elected officials and their executive assistants, because a lot of quality of life stuff will come in through that. But during the summer months, another thing that I did is the school resource officers during the summer months were free. We used to just assign them patrol. One of the things I did for just professional development is gave them the opportunity to look at some of our special units, whether it was the community liaison deputies, the traffic unit. We have it's a property crimes unit that goes after high offenders. We looked at the domestic violence unit, but we weren't able to place anybody there. But I gave them a chance. You can go work a patrol assignment of your choosing, or I'll let you work in one of these specialty units. And what it gave us the ability to do is one of them took up the project of helping our one, we have an abandoned vehicle community service officer who deals with Hulk vehicles, abandoned vehicles. One of the deputies worked all summer with her, just addressing, again, quality of life issues all over the county, because people dump these vehicles in the county right away in front of their homes and they want them addressed. And it gave us another resource. Giving people, some of our investigators, more bodies to help work cases. It was a way to, again, address some of this stuff. Speeding complaints come into my traffic unit. We have 6 traffic deputies for a county of 500,000 people and a couple reconstructionists. That's not enough enforcement people to address community members that are leaving stuff on our hotline to address these, speeding complaints or erratic vehicle or aggressive driving complaints. So it gave us some more resources to help address quality of life issues by just reallocating a resource that normally had just been thrown out into our patrol staffing. So those are just some ways that I've personally addressed that. Another thing that I do is I have been teaching a block of instruction to every new deputy hired by the sheriff's office, I think for the last 6 months, and it's just an hour to 2 hour block on nothing more than community policing. What does that mean? How are we going to do it in the department? And I bring one of our best examples, Jeff Papin, who is one of my community liaison deputies, but he's also incredible at community relations, to come in and speak to deputies, these brand new recruits or lateral officers, about how do we want to go represent the sheriff's department and make connections with the community and serve the community and set that expectation high right from day one, so that they don't learn bad habits. Because in patrol, it gets so busy, you can stop remembering that we're here to serve the public. You start worrying more about, how do I get from this call, and I got 20 more sitting on the screen, and I got partners going to domestics by themselves, and remembering that quality service doesn't take a lot of time. So those are some things that I've done.
Thank you, Ron. It is 4:30 at this time, so we really appreciate the time you've
Yeah.
taken today, Ron,
Thank you.
to answer questions for our community members. And we will have our next candidate up shortly.
Thank you,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, Ron.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for taking time out of your day to do this.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, okay, perfect. So our second candidate that we're going to hear from this evening is Ton Fan, who is most recently of the Davis Police Department in Davis, California. So he is joining currently, so he should be here in a second. So you can use this time to brainstorm some good questions for Ton.
We certainly appreciate that members of the community have signed up for this virtual open house. It's really exciting to see the community involvement that we have here in Shelton.
Yeah.
And the commitment to the city.
Yeah. So it looks like we should have Ton. Ton, can you hear us?
Yes.
Awesome. So Ton, welcome to our community open house. Thanks for taking the time to join us this afternoon. And like I said, everybody, Ton is most recently of the Davis Police Department. So if anyone has any questions for him, use the raise hand feature on Zoom and we'll call on you. So
we'll just wait for a moment here to see if any questions pop up.
Yeah. And oh, it looks like Amanda has a question. So Amanda, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi there. Thanks so much for coming to answer questions with us. I'm a resident in Shelton, and I've been following local events lately. Shelton is a really surprisingly purple city, and recently that's led to some tension in our downtown area. Most everyone in our community recognizes open carry laws, but recently we've seen behavior that really pushes the boundaries of open carry laws. So my question is, how will you address the issue of civilians brandishing firearms or weapons on public streets in an intimidating fashion?
Yeah, I pulled up some of those videos of some of the recent protests, and I have to say it's a scary situation to be in because you never know when it can really escalate to become really bloody and violent. I think that what I saw with the police department trying to, be the neutral party involved in trying to keep the peace and trying to de-escalate the situation as much as possible, while at the same time respecting both sides of their freedom of right to protest. It's one of those that you just have to pray and do all that you can to keep the tensions from getting too high to where people start to resort to violence with firearms. I think that it may even have to escalate to the point of making some arrests to get some of those agitators out of the situations, and hopefully you have enough mutual aid standing by to back you in your action when you do decide to take such action.
Thank you, Tom. And it looks like Diedrich has the next question. So Diedrich, if you could go ahead when you're ready.
I think that you should never be satisfied where you're at in my life and all the things that I do, personal life and business life. I always try to sit there and figure out, can I be more efficient? What is it that I could do to make this job of, whether it be gardening or doing a procedure at the police department? Is there a way that we can maybe make this process easier, freeing up time so that we can move on to do other things? I've seen through my law enforcement career that there's sometimes that sometimes we waste too much time on certain tasks. And so for me, I'm always in the back of my mind questioning, hey, is there a better way or easy way to do this? Coming from 3 different departments, I have learned that you can do things differently, and the 3 different departments approach, a specific task in different manners. You have your foundation, but at the end of the day, there's room for how we can be more efficient, and that's what I was referring to. Is there's always room for improvement.
Awesome. And it looks like we have another question from Heidi. So Heidi, go ahead.
I'm Heidi McCutche. I'm with the Mason County Chamber. I'm just interested in if you've spoken to any community members or business owners. If so, what their perception of crime in Shelton is, and what do they say the largest issue is?
I have not.
Okay. And up next, we have Joe Schmidt. So Joe, whenever you're ready, Councilmember Schmidt.
Good evening, Ton. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. Hey, so this is a homelessness discussion. Well, let's go ahead and lump homelessness, substance abuse, and mental illness into one thing here. But oftentimes, the homeless community and those suffering from substance abuse disorder and mental illness are subject to crimes themselves. And as you know, that within that group, we oftentimes those crimes are against sort of each other in a way. And how would you, as the leader of the police department, instill in the line level officers and in the community, a sense of equity with that particular group? And how would you ensure that when crimes do happen, that they are treated fairly and that they are investigated and looked into, and not as not necessarily just as local riffraff or local problems? And how do you instill that in your folks to avoid burnout and to continue to deliver high quality policing in the city of Shelton?
Yeah, it starts for me, regardless if you're homeless or you have a home or you're a millionaire or you're poor, we should treat all people with dignity and respect and fairness. Some of these people didn't choose the situation they're in. It's unfortunate for them. Homelessness is a big issue, and it can't be solved just with the police department. And we can't arrest our way out of homelessness. And it's not only a police department problem, it's a community problem. And we need to all invest our resources and energy into trying to come up with long-term solutions, where they get these people help with their mental issues or their drug addictions, or getting them, job trainings, how to interview for jobs, getting them long-term solutions of getting off the street. It's not working to move a homeless person from one bridge or field or whatever, where they're currently camping out, to another location. We're just going to be doing that all day long and year after year. What I've seen has been success is you designate a homeless coordinator who is a non-sworn personnel, who has a time to go out there and really spend time with these people and really getting to know their issues, their true issues of, hey, why is it you're homeless, and what is it that we can do? What resources can we pull together? I think sometimes when the police approach the homeless, it's intimidating and they don't want us help. They think we're there to arrest them again or hassle them. And I think the better approach is maybe a civilian to go out there and really coordinate how is it that they can get them, off the street. I think the biggest challenge is there's homeless people out there that don't want help, that this is their way of life and you can't say it or do anything. And this is going to be who they are, and they're going to choose to do that. Hopefully we can try to talk them into, a shelter or see that things can be better. And a lot of times, again, it's really a community issue. But at the end of the day, I would expect all the officers and myself to treat everyone, regardless of their current socioeconomics, with fairness and dignity, and remember that we're perfect servants there to help people and not to punish them for their life situations.
Thank you, Tom. It looks like Amanda has another question. So Amanda, go ahead, please.
Yeah, this is sort of a follow-up, and you touched on some of these things. My question is, how will you support de-escalation and mental health first aid training for officers?
That's a tough question because I have to be honest, I'm not familiar with the Washington's escalation training. I know that in California, we've done a lot of de-escalation training, and also how to deal with crisis situations. So I would have to be familiar with what's available in Washington for those type of trainings. I don't know if the state of Washington has instituted implicit bias training as well as part of their de-escalation training. So to be honest, I have to see what currently is available for the training and then go from there.
Thank you, Tom.
So we don't have any questions in the docket. Oh, just kidding. Every time I say that, one pops up.
Yep.
It looks like Councilmember Schmidt has a question. So Councilmember Schmidt, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, just a follow up to that, actually. You had mentioned, you weren't sure if it's a state law or not, or a state policy. Would you implement, if it was not, would you implement implicit bias training for your officers in your team?
Very definitely. We had a pretty big program at Davis PD where I was at, and it started with the command staff going through a few months, weekly 4-hour trainings with a facilitator. And I thought that was really eye-opening. And then that training eventually spread through the entire department. And it wasn't just a 4-hour block, but it was a few sessions over a few months. And it really got people to admit that whether you want to or not, that we all have biases, and as law enforcement officers, we have to keep those biases under control. And I think sometimes when you don't keep those under control, then you see situations like we see across the country where you have some racial tensions and issues that are, taking place in communities that have some controversy with racial divide. And so I thought it was valuable. I think that if the state doesn't have it, there's got to be a way that we can bring that to the state. But for sure, the Shelton Police Department, maybe we could be a guinea pig, and learn and then start something. We could be a trendsetter.
Thank you, Tom. It looks like Amanda has another question. So Amanda, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you tell us where you stand on cooperation with ICE?
Cooperation with ICE?
Yes, like ICE raids. Can you tell us where you stand on cooperating with the agency?
Yeah, I believe that as a law enforcement agency, you should cooperate with other law enforcement agencies, whether they be your local jurisdiction, nearby cities, state level or federal level. I don't think that we should go out and be doing raids just for just because we have nothing better to do. I think that we need to cooperate with them as far as getting the dangerous people off the streets who they may be looking for. But I think that I'm not a big fan that you should go out and harass, hardworking farmers who may be undocumented to get them out of our country. I hope that they're working on becoming documented and becoming citizens and contributing to our society. And if you're going to take the benefit, you should work for it. But I don't think that these blanket just getting separating families, that's for the sake of separating them and deporting them. It's not pretty. I think that's a thing that we need to change in this country, you know, and our system of helping people who really want to become citizens of this country, an easier process than it is. Um, I'd be hypocritical to say that I don't, I just say close our border. I think we should protect our borders, but I don't think that we need to be so strict. I myself am an immigrant. I came over in 1975 as a refugee, you know, from Vietnam. I'm so thankful for America. Thankful that America, you know, has done so much for me. And I'm so thankful that this country has given me all the opportunities, you know. But you know, I came over and in the right way. You know, we didn't sneak in. We were supported by the U.S. government, and I think that and my way of paying back has been all my years of service as a servant. You know, as a public servant, and so I hope I answered your question. I don't believe in these blanket raids, but I think that we need to cooperate with them in getting dangerous felons off our streets.
Thank you. Yeah, that was an awesome answer. I appreciate it.
So thank you, Ton. It looks like we have a question from Heidi. So Heidi, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Yeah, community-based policing is something that we hear people talk about quite a bit. Can you talk about some of the relationships that you built out in the community you're in now, and if there are certain leaders or community members that you've developed a relationship with that you can lean on and vice versa?
Yeah, well, currently I'm not doing any of that because I'm retired. But 2 years ago, before I left, we did a lot of community engagement out in the community, whether it be holding community meetings on a topic or an issue that, you know, may have happened across the nation, and people in our community wanted to meet and say, hey, how can you say that this won't happen here in Davis? I remember one great example is I was on the SWAT team, and we brought in a MRAP, a mine resistance armor piercing vehicle. And we got big fire back because they thought that it was a tank. And so we held a few meetings to allow the public to voice their opinion about why are we bringing this into the city? Why do we need it? They don't want, you know, military vehicles on our streets. And we explained that it was, you know, why we wanted it, and mainly, you know, to use for the SWAT team as a rescue vehicle and deploying our SWAT operators in a safe manner. At the end of the day, I have to say they did not approve it, and we had to get rid of it. But I think it was healthy to get together. I think those who participated in the meetings had a better understanding of where we stood and what our needs were. And out of that meeting came the proposal that, hey, down the road, we would work on getting the SWAT team a armor piercing vehicles for the rescues and for the deployment of our officers in a safe manner. I was on the HRC, the Human Relations Committee. It's a committee that, as a lieutenant and as a deputy chief, I was assigned to that team. They were a team that I thought hated the police. No one wanted to be on that committee, but I was asked to be. And actually it was healthy because it wasn't, they weren't always against the police. I think they just want to make sure that, you know, we are treating everybody fairly, especially the minority community in town. And I think that it was healthy to have a representative in those kinds of commissions in town, so that, you know, you can hear, once again, you know, going back to the homeless issue, it's a county-wide, it's a city-wide issue, and you just can't have a police department just being solely involved. And when you are tasked with getting other people to help you, you have to meet together and talk about, you know, from different departments of what the approach should be, and, you know, collaborate with solutions. I think that when you do these meetings and when you build trust in the communities, when you have a big incident like an officer-involved shooting, I don't think that you'll reduce, and I've seen that we've reduced the amount of maybe protests that we get from the community member, because they know that, hey, you know, our police department's not like that. You know, you may have seen that across, you know, the East Coast, but our police department doesn't operate like that. I know the officers there. We built relationship, we built trust, when you do those things behind the scene, you really eliminate a lot of backlashes you may get in the future from a possible controversial use of force or an uninvolved shooting, or maybe even, I'm thankful that Shelton has body cam cameras that, help people to see not only what is caught on people's cameras, but it's also from the view of the officers involved in that situation.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. I don't see any new questions that have popped up right now. So I guess we will ask, what piqued your interest in the job posting that you saw, and why were you interested in Shelton?
I have to say, I found Shelton by accident. I belong to a few police websites that advertise career openings across the nation. And I saw Shelton and I go, well, hey, I know somebody who works there. And so I had to do some research real quick to see, first of all, if Darren was leaving on good terms, or if he's if there's anything controversial that was pending against the city and him. And so I was glad to know that it was just his time. And so I called him, I actually emailed him first and say, hey, you have time to talk. And we spoke briefly about the department. And it sounds like Darren's leaving in good terms, good thing. And he's leaving a department in good shape. There's no cleaning house, as they say. You have to deal for the incoming chief. That's a good thing. My wife and I have talked about, possibly moving out of California. We've been talking about this for the last few years, and we have a few states in mind. We visited Washington a few times, spending most of our time up in Spokane, where we have extended family. We've driven through, actually by Shelton, but not through the town yet. We'll see that in the next couple of days to see if, this is something that we can call home. In a small community, I've worked in Davis, which is about 60,000, and I've worked in Vallejo, which is about 100,000+. And in smaller communities, I think you have more time to be, to build intimate relationships with people. You have more time to, and you're not going call to call, which is, I've seen that style of policing, and it doesn't really solve the problem. You're just putting a Band-Aid on the situation. But when you can really sit down and talk to people and really get to the root of the matter, and people are feel freely to be heard, I love having coffee with cops. That's one of the things that I look forward to monthly in Davis, where citizens come out and, hey, give me what you got, tell me. I'm not here to arrest you if you have a bad opinion of me or the department. We want to know the truth. We're not going to be better or improve unless we hear the truth from you. So don't sugarcoat it, and those have been productive. And so there's a waterway near Shelton, a big body of water. And Jody, my wife and I always dreamed of having this, house lake. I don't know if that's possible up there, but maybe. There's a lot more greenery up there than where I'm at right here. I have to admit, I have to get used to the many cloudy days compared to the sunny days here, but I'm also getting very tired of the heat and very tired of the fires that we have here. We're right, Vacaville, if you don't know, we're in between San Francisco and Sacramento. So it's a perfect location. You can go either way for entertainment, dinner outings. We're about, hour and a half away from the Sierra Mountains. So we have to travel. Looks like in Shelton, you just kind of walk out your door and you're in the Sierras, so that's a nice thing.
Awesome. Thank you. It looks like we have time for maybe one more question. If anybody has any last questions for John. Oh, it looks like Amanda has another question for you. So go ahead, Amanda.
This is kind of a tough last question. My apologies. But I really I've had to manage people before, and it can be really tough I've had to work with a lot of people. So I was hoping you could tell us about a time when you had to respond to excessive use of force while on the job, maybe from a peer, a superior, or even somebody that you had to supervise.
I have had to, as a manager, respond to a couple incidents of in custody deaths. And they thankfully at the end of the day it didn't turn out to be excessive force, but it was during the arrest process that the suspect ended up dying. And those are tough because first of all, there's a life lost that you wonder, could we have done anything differently to save that life, and what could we have done differently? I have to say in both of those cases, there was drugs on board, and if you understand that, sometimes there's probably not a whole lot that the police could have done in that situation. Those are difficult, and it's those times where the community is going to ask those same questions that I asked, like what could we have done differently to save that life, or what did we do to cause that death? What was our role in that? And again, in those situations, I always try to ask the public and even officers to be patient, let the investigation play itself out. We're going to get through this. Also remembering that, hey, there's a family out there that has lost a son or dad or an uncle or a grandpa, and we have to be sensitive to that as well. So I'm thankful that I've never had to respond to a use of force right after it happened as far as excessive force, but I have gone to in custody deaths call outs.
Thank you, Tom. Just looking to see if we have any other questions here that are going to pop up in the. Okay, it looks like we don't have any further questions for you today, Tom. We've got only about a minute left. So is there anything else you would like to add?
Yeah.
Wow, this is a lot easier than I anticipated it to be. There were some tough questions in there, but I thought I was going to have to answer some more questions about embarrassing moments in my life and things like that. So I'm thankful for this opportunity. I think it's something new for me. I've been at community meetings where questions were being asked, and this is the first time I've done this on Zoom, and I found it very interesting. I wish there was a lot more people. I think that people really should take a strong interest in selecting their next chief. I'm not the sharpest tool in the toolbox, as I say, but at the end of the day, it's not about knowing everything. It's about caring for people, and it's about picking the right fit for the community. And regardless if you pick me or not, I'm praying for the best for Shelton. I think you guys deserve the best, just like any other community. And again, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Awesome.
Okay, we'll just wait for a moment here until we have Carol Beeson sign in. That'll be our last candidate today.
Can start brainstorming your many questions for Carol. Awesome. So it looks like Carol's getting signed on, so we should see her in just a second.
Hi, all. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can, Carol.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Carol is currently a police lieutenant with the San Diego Police Department and has been with that department since 1995. So welcome, Carol. And we've got community members and city council members that have signed in. So we've asked them to use the raise hand feature when they have a question. So we'll just wait for a moment and see what pops up.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome.
I know Amanda has a question. Amanda, did you just want to start today?
Sure.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I live in Shelton. I own a house here, and I'm just kind of here as a resident. Shelton is a really surprisingly purple city, and recently that has led to some tension in our downtown area. While most everyone in our community recognizes open carry laws, we've seen some behavior that seriously pushes the boundaries of open carry. So my question is, how will you address the issue of civilians brandishing firearms and weapons on public streets in an intimidating fashion?
Wow. You know, Amanda, I watched some videos recently from the protest that you had back in September. And that was one of the first things that I noticed is that folks were open carrying weapons. And brandishing is very different than open carry. Brandishing is more of a crime of pointing those weapons. And of course, that needs to be addressed immediately. One of the things that I would want to do in a situation if I knew that there were protests would be to get in touch with those organizers, try to talk to them and see if we could talk about those things ahead of time. Because the difference between having a slung rifle in front of you and bringing it up and opening fire on a crowd takes 1 second. So I would like to have those conversations. It's important to let people have that opportunity to demonstrate and talk about what they feel are the injustices of the world. But it's quite another to do that in a way that makes people feel unsafe to do that. And as I watched, I was really impressed with how the officers handled that situation. But if we could convince folks ahead of time that even if they're bringing them in there, they have zero intention of using it, if it incites someone else to use it, then we have a problem. So I'd like to have that conversation with both sides to see if we could come up with an agreement not to have them in those situations, because it takes so little to go from a peaceful protest to violence in our streets. So that would be the first thing I would want to do, is try to talk to people and make sure that they're going to be there and be safe and not make anyone feel threatened, even if that wasn't their intention.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. It looks like we have a question from Councilmember Schmidt. So Councilmember Schmidt, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, just to follow up to that question, Carol, you know, you hit the nail on the head, which is how do you got to communicate with the individual groups. And, you know, that was something that was done ahead of time. However, you know, coming into this position as a new face with these contentious times that we're in, how would you initiate that trust building situation? How would you start off how would you start off on the right foot? So that way, when you do reach out and say, hey, you're going to have this demonstration, you're going to protest, you're going to counter protest, whatever you're going to do. Hey, I'm the police chief, and I'm here to work with you in a safe way. So what's your experience been in building trust in the community to where people would listen to you and take what you had to say seriously and in the right way?
I think part of that conversation is going to have to be about transparency and showing examples of how these things can spin out of control very, very quickly. One of the things as a police chief, whether you're in San Diego or in Shelton, you have to look at what's going on in other places around the world, because if it's happening there's always the possibility that it's going to happen in your town. And being able to present those situations to folks and say, look, these folks may not have ever had an intention for this to turn violent, but this chain of events caused this to happen. And we don't want those same things to happen in our town. So I think coming in forearmed with the potential problems that could happen and what problems other communities have had, and trying to show that we're trying to learn from the mistakes of others, would go a long way towards showing that it doesn't take much at all for something to go from being very, very peaceful to being very, very violent. And no one wants to have that happen in their community.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. It looks like our next question is from Heidi. So Heidi, go ahead.
Hi, Carol. Heidi McCutche, Shelton Mason County Chamber. I'm just interested in if you've had the chance to speak to any community members or business owners, what their perception of crime in Shelton is and what perhaps the biggest issue might be.
Heidi, unfortunately, I won't arrive in Shelton until tomorrow, but I did send a reconnaissance team up ahead of me, namely my husband Michael, and our 3 dogs actually arrived there yesterday. So he has actually been out there talking to folks. And I've spent a lot of time online reading different blogs where people talk about living in Shelton. If you Google, is it safe to live in Shelton? A lot of community members reach out and talk about what they think some of the issues are. I found that a lot of people thought that it was very safe, but at the same time, there were a lot of people that talked about drug problems in the community and how those drug problems make them feel unsafe, which would be issues that while getting that information online is not the same as actually being there and getting that information firsthand, it at least serves as a jumping off point. So my husband, he loves talking to people. So he spent his day going around going, hey, what do you think of Shelton? And he says that the folks that he talked to seem like they're very happy there. But then again, he's a stranger that walked in and said, hey, what do you think of Shelton? But I look forward to having that opportunity because I can't make educated decisions about what to do as a police chief unless I understand how the community feels about crime in that community.
Thank you, Carol. It looks like Amanda has another question. So Amanda, go ahead.
Thank you. How will you support de-escalation and mental health first aid training for officers?
Amanda, I love that you're so interested and invested in this process. I was on my department, I served as the mental health liaison for the San Diego Police Department for 2 years. And I spent a lot of time meeting with community groups about their fear of what would happen if they were to call law enforcement if one of their family members was in crisis. And one of the things that I learned is it's really important to explain to people what our procedures are, how we respond to different critical incidents, and have them explain to us what their issues are and how best to respond to them. I'm going to give an example. I had a meeting with an autism group of family members that had children that were autistic. And we've started brainstorming ideas of what we could do. This woman in particular, easy for me to say, she had a son that was autistic. He was a very large young man, and she feared if he ever got contacted by police that they would shoot him because he gets really worked up. And so we talked about ways that we could educate our officers on what autism looks like. And I think it's important for other mental health diagnoses to explain to our officers what it looked like. But on top of that, it's important to make sure our officers understand that time is their friend when it comes to responding to these crises, and that getting their resources in place ahead of time, coming up with a plan of what they're going to do, and getting a supervisor on scene will help keep a situation from spiraling out of control and end up with an unfortunate circumstance where violence has to be used against somebody that's just in a mental crisis.
Thank you, Carol. I know Amanda has another question. If you'd like to go ahead and ask that at this time, Amanda.
Yeah, just so you have the heads up, Carol asked like the same questions to everyone, so they already know that I'm asking. So, and others feel free to jump in. I don't want to take up too much space. So, but my next question is, where do you stand on cooperation with ICE, specifically with like ICE raids?
Well, Amanda, as a municipal law enforcement professional, my focus in law enforcement is to make people that live in the community feel safe. And that is regardless of whether or not they are in our community legally or illegally. I think the biggest travesty is for someone to be a victim of a crime or feel unsafe or need police assistance in some way, and be fearful to call and report what's happened because they're afraid that they're going to get deported. So I think it's important for us to stay in our lane and be the municipal police department and keep our community safe. Now, to that end, if ICE were in our area and those officers were in need of emergency assistance, then of course, we would have to go and aid them in that way. But dealing with immigration laws, that shouldn't be our focus. Our focus should be on keeping our community safe.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. It looks like we have another question from Heidi. So Heidi, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering, well, community-based policing is something that we hear a lot about. I'm wondering if you can share with us some of the relationships you've built out in your community and kind of some of the ways that you go about that.
The San Diego Police Department has been a pioneer in community-based policing as long as I've been on the department. I remember when I got on in about, I came on in 1995, but I didn't actually go out in the field until 96. And back then, it was all about coming up with your problem-oriented policing project. And then that has morphed into community policing. I learned a very, very valuable lesson when it comes to community policing. I was serving as a juvenile services team sergeant in one of our busier areas. And we would conduct curfew sweeps to try to keep kids from being victims of violent crime at night. And we had partnerships with our community to the point where people in the community would work in our command post. They would be the folks that were calling parents. They would help watch the kids while we were waiting for parents to show up. They would help check kids in. They took on all sorts of roles that would have been filled by officers if it weren't for their help. And because of that, we were far more effective and efficient as police officers. I could get more done with fewer officers because people in the community that were invested in helping their community, that wanted good things for their community, would come in and help us. And those relationships were so powerful that to this day, that's been 6-7 years ago. When I run into those folks in my community, it's like going to a family reunion. And I think that's the kind of relationship that police departments should be developing with their community. And once I had that experience, I was working on a homeless outreach team, and I took that experience and applied it to that position. Once I got there, I met with all of the different resource providers within my within my city, and met with them to find out what they do, what skills they could offer. And that ultimately morphed into what we called a coordinated outreach event, where they would send all of their outreach workers. They would partner with the police, and then we would go out and meet homeless people where they live and try to get them into resources. And because we were partnering with them, we were able to spread it out to a much larger group of people and potentially help them anymore. So I think community-oriented policing is not only a vital part of police work, but it certainly makes the police department more efficient and better informed about what's going on in their community.
Thank you, Carol. It looks like Councilmember Schmidt has another question.
If you could share with us a little bit, how do you recruit the next wave of police officers? Given the climate that we're in today, obviously, it may not be as an attractive of a job as it once was. How do you feel about that? And again, how do you draw the next wave of officers?
I think part of getting the next wave of officers comes from the professionalism that our police department shows to the community. Nobody would want to, first of all, I have to say, I think it's sad that that people would shy away from being in this field, because I think law enforcement is one of the most amazing career fields, because people can't live happy and productive lives unless they feel safe. And that's the police department's job, to make people feel safe. I think it's important to start instilling that in people when they're young, to show them those positive examples of police officers, especially in those situations where we have youth that have frequent encounters with the police, whether it be domestic violence or other crimes that are occurring in their neighborhood, to take that time and build those relationships with people and have those honest conversations about what that relationship should look like. I think that is the best place to start, is to explain to people what our job is. When I first started, the only thing I knew about police officers was what I saw on TV, you know, the car chases and the robberies, and it's so much more than that. And I think once people realize that it's far more about service than it is about guns and bank robberies and high-speed chases, that might help bolster some interest in our career as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Carol. I guess I'll ask a question that's probably going to seem like on a completely different topic, but why Shelton? I know San Diego to Shelton would be a huge jump. So what attracted you to this area or to the Shelton Police Department?
Well, when I first saw the job announcement, I didn't know anything about Shelton. So I started doing some research to see if I would be a good fit for your department. I started looking at all sorts of things on Google, from your budget for 2021 to what's on your Facebook page to Sheriff or Chief Moody's 5-year strategic plan, what his vision for the department is. Started looking at pictures of what the area is like, looked at what community members said. And the more I got to know about Shelton, the more I find that I love what I've seen of your little town. I can't wait to be there tomorrow to start getting to meet people in person and see for myself, because you can't really get a feel for a place until you're actually there. My husband retired earlier this year after 33 years on the San Diego Police Department, and he's always had this dream that he wants to live in an evergreen forest. Next month, I'm eligible to retire if I choose to. But I don't feel ready to do that. I still feel like I have stuff that I want to contribute. So this ended up being something that really appealed to me. He gets to live in his evergreen forest, and I still get to feel like I get to be part of a community. And I'm excited about learning about new law enforcement officers. You have an entire squad of officers that I've never met and who do policing differently than I do. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to learn Shelton's culture.
Thank you, Carol. Amanda, I see you popped up with another question here. Please go ahead.
Tony, Amanda.
Yeah, this one's kind of a tough one. And it comes from my experiences of having to manage people with difficult situations that come up. Can you tell us about a time that you responded to excessive use of force while on the job, maybe from a superior or a peer or someone that you supervise?
Amanda, I worked in internal affairs for about a year, and the whole purpose of that unit is to investigate either citizen complaints or internal investigations where someone has been accused of any kind of wrongdoing. And one of the cases that I investigated was an excessive use of force that I'd actually been called out on, where an officer had been in a pursuit with a known felon. The person ran across the freeway. There was a canine unit involved, and I guess the suspect at some point had tried to strangle the dog, and the canine handler lost control, and he, in my opinion, used excessive force. And so I have to be the objective fact finder and hold those folks accountable. It's so important in law enforcement, if someone is not being professional or is using excessive force or is mistreating the public, that they are found out and investigated and disciplined accordingly, because police work is hard enough when everybody's doing things right. But anytime someone does something wrong that tarnishes our reputation, it makes it harder for everyone. And it doesn't matter if it happened here, if it happened in any other jurisdiction. We have a responsibility to police our own and make sure that people are held accountable for their actions. Otherwise, we can't expect people to follow the police if the police aren't following the rules.
Thank you, Carol. So it looks like we have no new questions at this point. Did anyone else have any? Do we see a raise your hand from anyone at all?
Oh, looks like Amanda has a follow-up. So Amanda, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if you're familiar with emotional intelligence testing or maybe implicit bias testing. They're two kind of different things. So I'd love to hear you speak on both. Yeah, and just hear a little bit about that.
Amanda, it's so funny that you would mention that. I've spent, part of the reason I couldn't get up to Shelton earlier is that I was signed up for a leadership mentoring and coaching class that I've been in for the last 3 days. And one of the days we spent a lot of time talking about emotional intelligence and how important it is for us as leaders to practice emotional intelligence and understand what our triggers are, and be able to look at how our emotional intelligence influences how we make decisions. If we don't remain self-aware of how our emotions are affecting us, then we can't really make good decisions. So it's critically important for us to always take that step back and look at why we're responding the way that we are. And as far as implicit bias, I think all of us have our biases. And I think that if we're able to recognize what they are, it helps us to counteract those effects. And it's also important for us, if we see others that it appears that they are showing some kind of a bias, to address that with them and bring it to their attention, because all of us could do better if we're more self-aware of what our triggers are, what things we are going to respond to. So I'm a huge proponent of giving our officers both training in emotional intelligence so that they can understand how their emotions affect their decision making, and an implicit bias so that they may make better informed decisions because they know themselves better.
Thank you, Carol. Councilmember Schmidt is going to follow up with the next question.
Tell us about a career defining moment, positive or negative.
A career defining moment. You know, I have one that years ago, when I first joined the police department back in 1995, all I wanted to do was be a homicide detective, because that's what all the cop shows are about. And I thought that would be really cool. So throughout my career, I had put all my eggs in that basket. I was going to be the best homicide detective. They were going to make TV shows about me. So I put in for detective. I didn't put in the first time I was eligible for it. I put in for the second time and the third time, and I didn't get those opportunities. So I went to one of my supervisors and said, you know, I've done all these things. I've taken all these classes. I've done this job. Why am I not getting this opportunity? And this person sat me down and told me that he thought I should be taking the sergeant's test instead. And I remember leaving that meeting with him being so frustrated. You know, I wanted to kick the door on my way out because he wasn't listening to me. And it turns out at the end of the day, I wasn't really listening to him. So fast forward just a couple of weeks after that, another supervisor sat down with me because my command had offered me an opportunity to be an acting sergeant, and I turned it down. And he sat down with me and said, "What are you doing? Why aren't you taking these opportunities?" And I had told him honestly that my fear was that I would make a decision that would get somebody hurt. And he told me the fact that I was even concerned about that was one of the reasons I should consider doing it. And he told me, he goes, do you think there's anybody that's in a leadership position that isn't worried about that doesn't worry that they're going to get somebody hurt because they made a bad decision? And in that moment, he convinced me to take one of those opportunities. And it truly changed the trajectory of my career, because what I realized in that moment is that being a law enforcement officer is not the best job in the world, despite all of my beliefs. Being the supervisor that gets to take care of those officers that are ultimately going to take care of your community is probably the most rewarding thing that I've ever gotten the opportunity to do. And if those two individuals hadn't taken the time to explore my reluctance to do anything but be step-aside homicide, I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you today.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. And it looks like with maybe our last question, we have Amanda with one more question for you this evening.
Yeah, I actually just wanted a quick follow-up to my last question, which is, would you support implementing those types of trainings, emotional intelligence and implicit bias trainings within the Shelton Police Force if they're not already there? I don't actually know. So
I honestly don't know that either, but I would absolutely support that kind of training. Any kind of training that gives our officers more tools when they go out into the community so that they can make more informed decisions should be the goal of every police department. The better trained your officers are, the more tools they have in their tool belt. The ones that we wear around our waist are only, those are like the last resort tools. The ones that are in your head are the ones that you're going to use more often. The better trained our officers are, the more they know their own feelings, their own emotions, the better they're going to be able to respond to others. I can't stress enough how important it is for people to understand that the interactions that they have with people in the community is, you're going to have those kind of interactions far more often than you're going to use any of the other tools that are on your belt. So any kind of training that helps people understand themselves and others is invaluable.
Thank you, Carol.
Well, it looks like we have about 3 minutes left. So if anybody has a last question, it doesn't look like I'm seeing any. What do you think?
Yeah.
I think we're good. So thank you, Carol, for taking the time to spend a few minutes with us this evening.
It was truly my pleasure. Thank you so much. I really appreciated all the thoughtful questions. It's nice to see people that are really invested in choosing their next police chief.
Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carol.
See you tomorrow. Yes, see you tomorrow. Awesome. And with that,
we'd like to thank all of the community members and council members
Yeah.
for taking the time to attend today. Very much appreciated.
and you'll be emailed a link to a survey tomorrow morning to complete, to give us your thoughts and feedback about each of the 3 candidates that you had the chance to meet this evening. So be on the lookout for that pretty early tomorrow morning. So
Yeah, thank you.
thank you,
have a good
everybody.
evening.
Thank you.